What if we could see in all dimensions? We think we live in a 3D world. Maybe we do. But what if our eyes could see the 4th dimension? Or the 5th? What if they could see the 10th? Our perception of reality is limited. We can only see in 3 dimensions. That's height, width, and depth. We experience time as a sequence, A, before and after. But what if we could see all moments of time all at once? What if we could see the 4th dimension? It would look like a line. Each point on the line would be a moment in time. Our past, present, and future would all be there. This is how the 4th dimension is often visualized, but there are also higher dimensions. String theory says there should be 10 of them. Some physicists believe there could be many more. String theory and its development into M theory, which stands for membrane, attempts to explain how gravity works. By the way, it does this by adding extra dimensions to the 4 that we know. In this theory, the other 6 dimensions are curled up so small that we can't see them. They don't show up on our radar. So here's a question. If we could see the 5th dimension, what would it look like? The 5th dimension is usually described as a kind of plane. We'd see every possible outcome of events that affect our lives playing out in front of us. We'd see alternate realities where we made different decisions. We'd see infinite timelines. In fact, we'd see everything that happens in the 6th dimension. Now we're getting to the crazy part. According to string theory, each dimension has its own laws of physics. The 6th dimension may have different rules for how matter behaves. It may have different constants. Gravity might work differently. We may have multiple sets of physical laws, so when we enter the 6th dimension, we would be entering a world that doesn't quite follow our rules. And the higher dimensions we ascend, the more the laws of physics change. If we could somehow see the 10th dimension, the differences would be so great, we wouldn't even recognize ourselves. Let's take a step back from the science and ask a more philosophical question. If we could see in all dimensions, what would happen to our brains? How would they handle all that information? Would they simply collapse under the weight of it all? Or would they evolve? Could they? Because if we had evolved to see in 4 dimensions, why couldn't we evolve further to see in 5 or 6? Scientists say that if you were to experience the 5th dimension, your brain would explode. It just wouldn't be able to compute it all. But then again, we've been computing a lot more than our brains were designed for. Ever since we learned to read, we've been taking in huge amounts of information that our caveman brains weren't prepared for. Somehow we've managed. Maybe we could find a way to manage all the dimensions. In the 5th dimension, we would be able to navigate time much like we navigate space. We would be able to see every moment in time all at once. We would be able to witness history as it happened. We could see our ancestors living their lives. We could see the dinosaurs roaming the earth. We could see the birth of stars and the death of galaxies. We would see all moments in time at once. In the 6th dimension, we would begin to see alternate versions of ourselves. We would see versions of ourselves that made different choices at critical moments in their lives. We would see versions of ourselves who chose not to fight in World War II. We would see versions of ourselves who didn't get on that fateful flight with JFK. We would see versions of ourselves who lived longer and shorter lives. We would see versions of ourselves who became famous and infamous for different reasons. We would see all these versions of ourselves because in the 6th dimension, all possible outcomes play out. In the 7th dimension, we would see versions of ourselves who lived in different worlds. Worlds where the dinosaurs never died. Worlds where humans never evolved. Worlds where different species dominate. We would see versions of ourselves who lived in different universes. We might see creatures very much like ourselves living their lives on different planets. We might see entirely different forms of life living their lives in different ways. And in the 8th dimension, we would see versions of ourselves who existed outside of time. We would see versions of ourselves who lived forever. We would see versions of ourselves who died and were reborn into different bodies. We would see versions of ourselves who transcended the need for bodies altogether. In the 9th dimension, we would see versions of ourselves who lived in different states of being. We would see versions of ourselves who were happy and unhappy. We would see versions of ourselves who loved and hated. We would see versions of ourselves who were at peace and were filled with anger. And in the 10th dimension, we would see versions of ourselves who lived under different laws of physics. We would see versions of ourselves who lived in worlds where gravity worked differently. We would see versions of ourselves who lived in worlds where matter was composed of a different number of dimensions. We would see versions of ourselves who lived in worlds where the constants of physics were different. This is what we would see if we could see in all dimensions. This is what we would see if we could see in all dimensions. Now let's go back to the philosophical question. If we could see in all dimensions, would mystery even exist? Would there be anything left to wonder about? Would it all become boring? Here's another philosophical question. If we could see in all dimensions, would we be able to save the world? Could we see the threat of climate change coming and do something about it? Or would we see the end of the world and be powerless to stop it? Would we see versions of ourselves who saved the world and versions of ourselves who didn't? What would we learn from those versions of ourselves? Would we heed their warnings? Would we follow their example? Imagine being able to see every possible version of yourself in your future. Imagine being able to see the consequences of every decision you ever made. Imagine being able to see the world as it really is, beyond the veil of our limited perception. What would we do with that knowledge? Would we use it to improve our lives? Would we use it to help others, or would we just be overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information? If we could see in all dimensions, we would see the world as it really is. We would see the truth. We would see the beauty. We would see the mystery. We would see everything. So here's the ultimate question. Are we ready to see the whole truth? Are we ready to see everything? Or maybe we aren't ready to see the whole truth. Or maybe some of us already can.